Chapter 5. Dr. Imo. After a brief moment, Hanli felt a tightening sensation around his waist as his body grew light, and his body was suddenly lifted upwards. Turning his head, Hanli saw the lanky senior helping him ascend the cliff. With one hand around Hanli's waist, the senior disciple climbed up the cliff with nimble legs. At the same time, Hanli noticed that the sun had already reached the center of the sky. It was noon, so I failed the test after all. Hanli felt depression set in his heart. It seemed unfair. Even though he had desperately pushed forward, almost to the point of disregarding his life, why couldn't he compare to the other children? In the blink of an eye, the top of the bone refining cliff appeared before him, where were 6 other children resting on top of the cliff in front of him. Aside from the 6, Wu Yin was also there, conversing with a middle-aged old man wearing a dark blue garb. Division Head Yu as well as Protector Wong were also standing near him. They were waiting for the senior disciples to escort the rest of the children up the bone-refining cliff. After all the children had been escorted up the cliff, Division Head Yu stepped forward with a solemn expression on his face as he began to address the kids. This time around, only 7 of you passed. Out of this group, 6 will enter my 100 Forged Division and formally become our sect's inner disciples. Division Head Yu spoke slowly at the crowd of children. As for Wu Yin, the first disciple to reach the top of the bone-refining cliff, he performed outstandingly and, as such, will be directly sent to the 7th Supreme Division to learn the sect's secret skills and martial arts. After speaking, Division Head Yu glanced at the old man wearing the dark blue garb. The old man twirled his beard around one hand while nodding in satisfaction at Division Head Yu. As for the others, Division Head Yu contemplated the outcome of the remaining children for a moment before rubbing his chin and saying softly, Zhang Tai and Hanli, although these 2 did not pass the test, they still performed admirably. Their determination will allow them to cope with the pain of practicing martial arts. The 2 of you will be unofficial disciples assigned to an instructor of our sect for the next half year. After half a year, you will be tested again. If you pass, you'll be able to become inner disciples, but if you fail, you will be sent to join the outer disciples, helping the sect handle its external affairs. Hanli stole a glance at the person named Zhang Tai. Like Hanli, Zhang Tai had begun climbing the rope but failed to reach the summit of the bone-refining cliff before midday. Protector Wong, give the rest of the children some silver coins and send them back to their homes, said Division Head Yu as he gave a cold stare at the children who failed the exam. Understood. Protector Wong complied with the order, and he led the remainder of the children back down the cliff. Zhang Jun, Wu Ming Rue, the 2 of you will assist me in sending the rest of these children to the Vice Division Head and Instructor Li. 2 senior disciples stepped forward and separated Hanli and the rest into 2 groups before leading them down the cliff. One of the senior disciples was the lanky senior that had always been behind Hanli. As they were descending the cliff, Hanli could not help but steal a glance at Wu Yin and discovered that he was still chatting with the old man in a dark blue robe, seemingly without any intent of moving from the spot. He's different from the rest of you. In the future, he will most likely be a core disciple. Only core disciples are sent to the 7th Supreme Division to train in the sect's secret arts. Once he completes his training, at the very least, he will have the rank of a protector. The voice belonged to the long and thin-faced senior, who could tell what Hanli was thinking. From his tone, Hanli could hear undisguised hints of envy mixing with jealousy. Isn't Wu Yin just pulling strings and depending on his family's connections? If it wasn't for his older cousin being married to Vice Sect Leader Ma, how could he be selected as a core disciple with such meager skill? He already surpassed the age limit, but he was still sent to the 7th Supreme Division. The other senior said in a freezing tone that made chills run down people's spines. Zhang Jun, have you gone mad? How dare you gossip about the sect leader's decisions? If this news were to be spread, both of us could suffer severe punishments and end up in dire straits. After hearing Zhang Jun's words, the senior with the long and thin face felt startled and rapidly checked his surroundings to make sure no one heard Zhang Jun's words. Only after ascertaining that there were no other disciples around did he heave a sigh of relief. The senior with the cold countenance snorted, as if he were harboring hatred in his heart, but after Wu Ming Rue's warning, he stopped talking. Only then did Hanli understand that the senior with the cold countenance was Zhang Jun listening to their conversation. Hanli could roughly understand what they were talking about. Wu Yin entered the 7 Supreme Division, not because of his own skills, but because he had the backing of the vice sect leader. As they walked along the mountain path, the two seniors both thought of the sect's internal affairs, which filled them with sadness. Lacking the mood to converse, they silently led the children forward. The rest of the children also dared not speak out of turn. Perhaps they were thinking of the differences between the 7 Mysteries sect and their hometowns. Just as they were passing through a forested region, an old man emerged from the woods. He appeared to be over 60 years old and was tall and thin with a yellow tinge to his skin and a head full of white hair. As he approached them, he coughed with every step, causing many of them to worry that he was suffering a great deal and could collapse at any moment. The senior disciples, upon seeing this old man, did not show a trace of worry on their faces. Instead, they respectfully greeted the old man with a bow. Dr. Mo, this disciple greets you. Is there anything that you need this disciple to handle? Zhang Jun, unlike his previously cold demeanor, now had an expression full of respect. To Zhang Jun, this old man in front of him was worthy of more respect than division head Yu, and even the sect leader. Oh, is this the latest batch of disciples? The old man continued coughing and asked with a hoarse voice. Yes, among the 8 of them, 6 are official inner disciples, and 2 are unofficial disciples, responded Zhang Jun. Coincidentally, I'm currently in need of some manpower, specifically an alchemy apprentice and an herb gatherer. Let these 2 follow me instead. Dr. Mo randomly raised his finger and pointed, just as luck would have it, towards Hanli and Zhang Tai, the 2 unofficial disciples. This disciple will obey your words. These 2 unofficial disciples actually caught eyes of the esteemed Dr. Mo. Their karma must be exceptional. The 2 of you, why are you still standing there? Hurry, and come to pay your respects to Dr. Mo. If you are able to learn a thing or 2 about the arts of healing from this esteemed elder, you will be extremely fortunate. The 2 seniors had no traces of hesitation or objection on their faces. The senior with the long and thin face, Wu Ming Rue, flattered Dr. Mo in order to curry favor with him. Hanli and Zhang Tai, upon seeing the 2 senior disciples' sudden change of heart, naturally couldn't object. They could only accept in silence and follow the old man into the forest. Dr. Mo led the 2 of them down a small path that meandered through the forest. The path turned left and right before suddenly stopping in front of an entrance leading to a luscious green valley. On the left side of the valley was a large field used for farming medicinal herbs that emitted a fragrant smell into the air. Gazing at the field, Hanli spotted many herbs that he couldn't recognize. At the same time, on the right side of the valley were lines of houses of varying sizes. Hanli looked around, but apart from the gateway they entered through, there didn't seem to be any other exits in the valley. This valley is called Godhand Valley. Other disciples will not dare enter this valley unless they are sick or injured. The old man stood in the middle of the line of houses and pointed to a smaller house. For now, this will be your home. Rest and replenish your energy. When night falls, look for me in my house so I can inform you about some things. The 2 of you can call me Old Mo. The old man huffed and considered for a moment before saying, Dr. Mo is also acceptable. After speaking, Dr. Mo ignored the 2 of them and slowly walked towards a lavish-looking house, coughing with each step. Completely exhausted, Hanli did not bother to check with Zhang Tai before entering the smaller house and finding a bed to fall asleep on. He was satisfied, because, at this moment, he was halfway to becoming an inner disciple of the 7 Mysteries sect. Chapter 6. Nameless Oracular Chant. Get up, hey, get up. A barely audible sound came from above Hanli, rousing him from his deep slumber. As soon as he opened his eyes, a huge face appeared in front of him. In shock, Hanli quickly scrambled backwards, and only then was he able to see that the owner of the face that had frightened him to death was the boy named Zhang Tai. Hurry up and eat this. After you've finished, we need to see Old Mo, Zhang Tai said, passing a couple steaming white buns over to Hanli. Where did you find this food? Hanli stared blankly for a moment before accepting the buns. At a big kitchen near the valley, I saw a ton of people eating there, so I also grabbed a portion. After I had finished, I realized that you hadn't eaten yet. so I grabbed 2 buns for you.
Zhang Tie smiled sincerely at Han Li.
Thank you very much, Brother Zhang. Han Li was somewhat touched. Seeing that Zhang Tai looked quite a bit older than himself, he couldn't help but blurt out the words, Brother Zhang. And no problem. I'm too used to labor. If I'm idle even for just a moment, I always feel a bit uncomfortable. If you ever need any help in the future, don't hesitate to tell me. I have nothing else but strength. Zhang Tai seemed to be somewhat embarrassed as he began to stammer. Han Li hadn't eaten breakfast or lunch and was somewhat starved. In just a few bites, he devoured 1 bun, and a few moments later, both of the large buns completely disappeared into his stomach. It's getting late. We should go see old Imo. Han Li burped a few times and looked out the window towards the setting sun. After mentally calculating the time, he decided that it was probably about time to go see Dr. Imo. Zhang Tai didn't object, following Han Li to Dr. Mo's house. There were rows of bookshelves along all 4 walls of Dr. Mo's residence. These shelves were densely packed with various books. Old Imo. Old Imo. Dr. Mo's back was tightly pressed against his chair as he was currently engrossed in reading the book in his hands. He didn't seem to have noticed the arrival of the 2, nor had he heard their greetings. The 2 of them were still children after all, so when they saw Dr. Imo ignore them, they were at a loss on what to do, unsure of what would be the best course of action. Thus, they could only stand to one side and wait. Finally, by the time Han Li's feet had begun to turn numb, Dr. Imo slowly placed his book down onto the table beside him. He coldly looked over at the 2 children and picked up his teacup to drink a few sips before slowly saying, From this day on, you 2 will be accepted as my unofficial disciples. I will teach you some general knowledge on picking medicinal plants and refining medicines. I may also teach you 2 some life-saving healing techniques, but I will absolutely not teach you any martial arts. Dr. Imo expressionlessly said, as he put down his teacup again. I will teach you 2 a cultivation chant to nurture your mind and body. Although it won't allow you to directly subdue your enemies, it will still help strengthen you. If you guys really want to learn some martial arts, you can go learn them from some other instructors. If you do so, I won't object, but I'll check your progression on this cultivation chant in half a year. If you don't meet the standard, I'll force you out to become an outer disciple. Do you 2 understand? Dr. Mo's tone suddenly became much more serious. It looked like he attached a great deal of importance to this chant. We understand. Han Li and Zhang Tai replied in unison. You 2 should leave now. Come back tomorrow morning. Dr. Imo waved his hands at the 2 of them, gesturing for them to leave. He then picked up his book and began reading it again. Before Han Li left, he couldn't help but glance back at the book in Dr. Mo's hands. It was a pity that he didn't know how to read. He could only tell that the title was made up of 3 large, black characters. Unfortunately, Han Li didn't recognize them. As soon as Han Li walked out of Dr. Mo's residence, Han Li couldn't help but let out the breath he had been holding. He didn't know why, but just now, he hadn't even dared to breathe in Dr. Mo's presence. His mind had also been incredibly tensed. Now that he had left, he immediately loosened up, returning to his normal state. During the following few days, Han Li's excitement never faded. He'd finally become a disciple of the 7 Mysteries sect. Although he was still just an unofficial disciple, it was still better than the children that had been sent home. Even if he didn't pass the test in half a year, he could still become an outer disciple like Third Uncle. In Han Li's opinion, Third Uncle was a person of great status and position, so he didn't concern himself over the examination in half a year. He even secretly hoped from the bottom of his heart that he wouldn't pass. That way, he could leave the mountain earlier to see his parents and his most beloved younger sister again. During the following few days, Dr. Imo would teach them some medicinal knowledge in the mornings. In the afternoons, he would make them go to the library to learn how to read, and have them study the body's 12 main meridians, energy channels, and acupoint locations. As for the little he taught them of martial arts, he made them maintain the horse stance and hit straw dummies. A month later, the 2 of them were completely isolated from the other children. They no longer spent time learning anything else besides the chant. Ever since Dr. Imo had begun teaching them, they spent most of their time practicing the nameless chant. Dr. Imo strictly ordered them to not tell the chants to anyone else. If even a small segment was leaked, Dr. Mo would harshly punish them and kick them out of his apprenticeship. During this period of time, Hanli began to have a better understanding of the Seven Mysteries sect and Dr. Mo. The Seven Mysteries sect had someone named Wang Lu, who possessed the teachings handed down by the Sovereign Seven Supreme. Wang Lu became the sect leader of the Seven Mysteries sect, and he split the sect with the help of the three other vice sect leaders. They divided the sect into two segments, the inner branch and the outer branch. The outer branch had a total of 4 divisions, namely the Flying Bird Division, Treasure Gathering Division, Four Seas Division, and External Blade Division. The inner branch also had 4 divisions, namely the 100 Forge Division, 7 Supreme Division, Consecrated Division, and Bloodblade Division. In addition to the inner and outer branch, there was also a council of elders that reported to the vice sect leaders and the sect leader. As for Dr. Mo, he was not originally a disciple of the Seven Mysteries sect. A few years ago, sect leader Wang carelessly fell into an enemy's trap while outside of the celestial Rainbow Mountain and was heavily injured from the enemy party's attacks. As he wavered on the brink of death, his allies were helpless to do anything to save him. Just then, they happened to encounter Dr. Mo, whose brilliant healing and effective medicines saved sect leader Wang's life. As a result, sect leader Wang naturally couldn't help but feel extremely grateful toward Dr. Mo. He later found out that in addition to his profound medical expertise, Dr. Mo was also a strong martial arts practitioner, which led sect leader Wang to invite Dr. Mo to join his sect. The elders carefully picked a small valley in the mountains to erect a residence specifically for Dr. Mo's use in order to make the shift as comfortable as possible. Thanks to him, the valley soon became a venerated place within the Seven Mysteries sect. Although none of the disciples had ever witnessed his skills, nor did they know how strong his martial arts was, Dr. Mo had used his brilliant medical expertise to save quite a few of the disciples' lives. Thus, although he was normally expressionless and was a man of few words, he received a great amount of respect. Chapter 7. The Difficulties of Cultivating. Hanli slowly transferred energy from his meridians back to his dantian. He had managed to reach the 7th cycle of qi circulation today, and Hanli knew that his body had already reached the limit of what it could handle. If he were to try to do another cycle, then all of his meridians would completely rupture, inciting a pain worse than death. Even though he was a courageous person, Hanli couldn't help but break out in cold sweat at the thought of this pain. It had already been half a year since Hanli joined the sect, and the official-unofficial disciple exam had ended slightly over 2 months ago. Only a small portion of the unofficial disciples were officially promoted to the inner branch. Most unofficial disciples weren't able to pass this point and had no other choice but to pack their belongings and become a disciple of the outer branch. The children that didn't pass would generally enter the Treasure Gathering Division or the Flying Bird Division. For those that showed outstanding performances, they would receive another step further in their training and would then have the chance to join the more respected External Blade Division. Of course, it was only natural that the Four Seas Division was the most respected of the 4 divisions, but unfortunately, they only accepted those that made names for themselves through their martial arts. If one didn't have a certain level of expertise in martial arts, it was pointless for them to even dream about joining the Four Seas Division. These immature and inexperienced children were even less worthy of any mention. When Hanli recalled the details of the examination from 2 months ago, he couldn't help but feel a bit frightened. The participants had to first run a lap around the celestial Rainbow Mountain, amounting to a total distance of close to 10 kilometers. Immediately after, they had to group up and engage in combat with each other while secluded in the forest. Finally, they had to endure a certain number of attacks from their more skilled and powerful senior martial brothers. With each and every test, Hanli couldn't help but feel a little joy at the misery of others. During their entire stay at the Seven Mysteries sect, Hanli and Zhang Tai had never taken such a terrifying test before. Dr. Mo had said that his examination would only test them on the cultivation chant. Of course, Hanli didn't believe the test would be as easy as it sounded. Looking back, Hanli could clearly remember the intense effort he had to put into his cultivation. According to Dr. Mo, this oracular chant was only a single part of a set. Within half a year, Hanli and Zhang Tai would have to successfully comprehend the first layer of the cultivation chant, which Dr. Mo would be examining. If the two met Dr. Mo's expectations, then they could become Dr. Mo's personal disciples and even share the same benefits as inner disciples. Ever since he heard about the different treatments afforded to inner disciples and outer disciples, Hanli completely abandoned his plan of simply becoming an outer disciple so he could return home. At the moment, nothing was more important to him than to be able to receive more silver from the seven mysteries sect for him to take and send back to his family. He had truly become fearful and sick of living in poverty, and he knew that the more silver he earned, the better the lives of his siblings and parents would become. After learning Dr. Mo's chant, Hanli had not once stopped cultivating. He spent every possible moment of the day and night relentlessly practicing the chant. Due to the fact that Dr. Mo hadn't provided them with any guidance in cultivation, Hanli could only figure things out for himself. He referenced the basic seven mysteries sect inner cultivation art used by the other children, positive yang energy, and devised his own method for cultivation. Relying on this method, he cultivated arduously for 3 months, but Hanli was shocked to realize that his progress was extremely slow. He had spent a great deal of effort, and yet he was only rewarded with one small thread of cool energy inside of his body. The energy was so infinitesimal that he could barely notice that it was there. If he hadn't checked his body carefully for results, he would not have noticed the strand of energy. Could this be the rumored true qi the instructors had talked about? Hanli suddenly came to this realization. The other disciples cultivating the positive yang energy had told him that there was a distinct flow of warm energy being generated within their bodies. However, the thread of energy in Hanli's body was extremely cold, completely opposite from the energy gained from cultivating positive yang energy. Looking at the results, it was obvious that Hanli was very far behind the other disciples. Those who used the true qi from the positive yang energy cultivation were able to punch a fist-sized hole through a small tree trunk and leap 3 meters into the air. Hanli, however, after circulating the strange qi in his body, felt practically no different from his normal self. The only difference he could tell was that his spirit was more vigorous and his appetite was even more ravenous than before he came to the mountain. But what use was that? Seeing that the other children on the mountains were gaining ridiculous powers, Hanli couldn't help but feel dejected. After realizing that he had barely made any progress, Hanli had nearly given up on his several months of hard work. He thought that with such a huge gap between himself and the others, he wouldn't have a chance to catch up to the other children in the remaining amount of time before Dr. Mo's test and successfully pass it. It would be better to plan for his trip back home instead. Incidentally, Hanli one day came across the cultivating Zhang Tai and realized something. Ever since Zhang Tai had started his cultivation with this mysterious oracular chant, his body showed no changes at all. There was no effect. Not even a small amount of true qi could be seen. Knowing that he had at least succeeded in forming one strand of true qi, Hanli regained the confidence he had thrown away earlier. With the remaining amount of time, he furiously tried to cultivate the oracular chant. He worked even harder than before, training like a madman. Hanli began to use every single second to meditate and cultivate. Even when he was sleeping, he kept his body upright in a meditative position in hopes of having even a slight breakthrough. Of course, this intensive training method couldn't be maintained for more than a few days. If he strained himself past his limit, his lack of sleep would make him unable to efficiently cultivate during the day. What puzzled Hanli the most was that after Dr. Mo imparted the oracular chant to the two of them, he never once asked them about the progress of their cultivation. Even their questions on cultivation had been ignored by him, as if he had forgotten he imparted the chant to them. Every day, Dr. Mo would bring out the book with the 3 black characters written on the back cover and study it, staring intently as if the lines of text outlined the image of a beautiful woman and the cover was made of pure gold. In the beginning, Hanli and Zhang Tai thought that Dr. Mo no longer wanted to be a medical doctor and was studying bitterly to pass the imperial exam. After the 2 children learned to read, however, they recognized the 3 words on the back cover, which read, Scripture of Longevity. Dr. Mo was reading a book about how to cultivate oneself to the point of extending one's lifespan. In that moment, the 2 children suddenly realized that Dr. Mo wasn't trying to pass the imperial exam. He was trying to live thousands of years like a river turtle. Chapter 8. Entering the sect as a disciple. After half a year of relentless cultivation, Hanli was finally going to take Dr. Mo's test. Zhang Tai was fidgeting as he stood close to Han Li. His behavior was nothing strange, as Zhang Tai had told Han Li that for the past 6 months he had made no progress on the oracular chant given to them by Dr. Mo. Han Li knew that Zhang Tai's efforts in cultivating the oracular chant were no less intense than his own. Although Zhang Tai was unlike Han Li, who practiced like a madman, the efforts he expended could still be considered conscientious and diligent. Strangely, the oracular chant seemed to be useless to Zhang Tai. No matter how much effort he put in, he wasn't able to produce even the slightest amount of effects. It seems like Zhang Tai would never successfully cultivate the oracular chant. Han Li's mind was unsettled. He knew that Zhang Tai would probably fail the test. Even though Han Li was slightly successful in learning the oracular chant, he was not stronger than Zhang Tai in any way, so there was a high chance of both of them failing Dr. Mo's test. Fearing the worst, Han Li had assiduously cultivated, and by the time of the exam, the strange energy flowing in his body had increased by a little. If the energy was as thin as a strand of hair in the past, it was now slightly thicker, resembling a thread of cotton. Even so, this did not reassure Han Li, who feared he might not pass Dr. Mo's test. "Are you guys prepared? Let me take a look at the fruits of your cultivation." Dr. Mo squinted his eyes as he sat and coldly stared at the two of them. "We are ready." Han Li and Zhang Tai could only put forth a bold face and agree. Dr. Mo slowly rose from his chair and stood up. He put the book that always seemed to be nearby down on the table. "Extend your hand. Circulate your qi for me to see." Dr. Mo held Zhang Tai's right wrist with one hand and placed his other hand on top of Zhang Tai's dantian. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Dr. Mo retracted his hands and closely evaluated Zhang Tai. Zhang Tai's face was flushed as he nervously put his hands behind his back, lowering his head and not daring to look Dr. Mo in the eye. He knew Dr. Mo had most certainly discovered that he made no progress in the oracular chant and would probably punish him to teach the two of them a lesson. "It's your turn." To their surprise, Dr. Mo didn't even show the slightest indication that he would punish Zhang Tai. Some slight hints of disappointment flashing past Dr. Mo's eyes were the only reactions Dr. Mo had. After examining Zhang Tai, he turned to Han Li and motioned for him to come closer. He then held Han Li's wrist and began the inspection. "His touch feels just like ice. It doesn't feel like the touch of a human being," Han Li mused in his mind. The skin on Dr. Mo's hand was dried and full of calluses. As he held Han Li's hand, Han Li could feel slight waves of sharp pain. Perhaps it was because the external interference agitated the energy within Han Li's body, but the strange flow of energy actually started to circulate by itself. It flowed through his meridians and energy channels, past all his acupoints from his dantian to his head, and flowed to his 4 limbs. It completed a full cycle before flowing back to his dantian. The moment the strange flow of energy circulated throughout his entire body, Han Li's pain from Dr. Mo's touch immediately dissipated. "Aye." Dr. Mo involuntarily let out a sound of surprise. It appeared that he had discovered the strange flow of energy in Han Li's body. "Quick, circulate your energy according to that chant that I taught you once again." Although Dr. Mo tried his best to suppress his elation, traces of madness and excitement still flashed through his eyes, causing Han Li to be secretly alarmed. "Slowly, slowly. Let me take a good look." Dr. Mo added as his usually cold tone of voice became rushed, placing his other hand on Han Li's dantian. Han Li could feel both of Dr. Mo's hands tremble slightly. As Han Li circulated the strange energy, Dr. Mo became quite agitated. "Not bad. Not bad. This is the feeling that I wanted. I'm not wrong. I'm not mistaken. Ha ha ha." Dr. Mo, after a thorough examination, could no longer hold back and started laughing maniacally, both his hands tightly clutched on Han Li's shoulder. Even his normally squinty eyes enlarged as they intensely stared at Han Li. It was as if he had seen a rare and valuable treasure, his eyes flashing with faint traces of madness. Han Li's ears were ringing from Dr. Mo's unceasing laughter, and he felt slight pain on his shoulder. Seeing the madness in Dr. Mo's eyes, Han Li could not help but feel terrified. "Good, very good." From the expression on Han Li's face, Dr. Mo could tell that he was frightened. Only then did Dr. Mo realize that he had been overeager. Thus, he controlled himself and regained his composure. In the future, you must work as hard as you're working right now. From this day onwards, you will be promoted to my personal disciple. After saying that, Dr. Mo released his tight grip on Han Li's shoulder and proceeded to pat him in encouragement. Dr. Mo regained his usual calm look, almost as if his loss of control had never happened. But from his occasional glances at Han Li, one could tell that he was still tremendously excited. As for you, Dr. Mo finally shifted his gaze onto Zhang Tai. Zhang Tai was thunderstruck by the events that unfolded earlier. Seeing that Dr. Mo shifted the topic of conversation to him, Zhang Tai awoke from his daze with a start. Just thinking that he failed the assessment and would be asked to leave the mountain caused traces of bitterness to appear on Zhang Tai's face as he looked at Dr. Mo. Your talent is questionable. Despite such a long period of time, you still could not produce even a small trace of energy. Accepting you as my personal disciple would be too much of a stretch. Dr. Mo repeatedly shook his head. Zhang Tai's heart fell down to the bottom of an abyss after seeing Dr. Mo shaking his head. But suddenly, Dr. Mo seemed to have thought of something interesting as he gazed at Zhang Tai with a bizarre expression in his eyes. Looking at your bone structure, I may have a suitable martial arts technique for you. I just wonder if you are willing to learn from me. Dr. Mo's sudden shift in demeanor caught the two by surprise. It was as if Dr. Mo wanted to allow Zhang Tai to pass the test. The moment Zhang Tai heard Dr. Mo, how could he reject the offer? He immediately gave his consent and said that he would be willing to learn from Dr. Mo. Good, very good. The two of you can depart first. Tomorrow, I will hand you both new cultivation techniques. It could be seen that Dr. Mo's current spirits were excellent. Han Li and Zhang Tai both looked at each other and felt that today's test had been full of twists and turns. After all, both of them had actually passed, leaving them both relieved and satisfied.